Stop everything you are doing for the next 10 minutes because a massive, invisible shift just occurred in your dynamic with someone who took you for granted. And if you make the wrong move in the next 48 hours, you will hand all your power right back to them. Right now, somewhere in the quiet spaces of their day, a specific individual has hit a wall of absolute cognitive dissonance. For weeks, months, or maybe even years, their subconscious mind operated on a fixed rule. No matter what I do, no matter how cold I act, no matter how much distance I create, they will keep reaching out. They will keep checking in. They will keep chasing. That rule was their psychological safety net. It gave them the leverage to pull away without ever risking the loss of your presence. It allowed them to feel control without investment. But then, without a drama-filled confrontation, without an explosive argument, and without sending an angry long text, you stopped. You didn't just slow down, you completely cut off the energetic supply. You stopped checking their stories. You stopped double messaging. You stopped seeking validation. And in the world of human behavioral profiling, when an expected input suddenly drops to absolute zero, the human brain enters a state of rapid threat assessment. They are currently moving through a predictable step-by-step sequence of psychological stages designed by their ego to get you back into rank. They are going to test you. They are going to use subtle micro-behaviors, calculated indirect contact, and strategic emotional bait to see if your silence is real or just a temporary game. If you do not recognize these signs, you will fall for the exact trap they are setting. You will mistake a cheap bid for attention as genuine remorse, respond too quickly, and immediately restore their feeling of absolute dominance. That is why you cannot afford to skip a single second of this. In this breakdown, we are going to dissect the precise behavioral roadmap of what happens inside their mind the exact moment they realize the chase is dead. You will learn the hidden micro-expressions, the passive-aggressive leverage plays, and the 3 distinct psychological phases they will go through to reestablish control. More importantly, you will receive the exact behavioral playbook to remain entirely unshakable, keep your power intact, and force them to face the reality of what they actually lost. Pay close attention to Phase 3, because that is where 95% of people break, drop their frame, and ruin all their progress. Let's dive in. Let's cut through the emotional noise and look at human behavior through a lens of cold, operational clarity. When you spend a significant amount of time chasing another human being, you aren't just giving them affection, you are training their central nervous system. You are conditioning them to expect your baseline presence as a permanent background asset. You become a zero-risk, high-yield source of validation. They learn that they can treat you with apathy, pull away, or withhold effort, and your reaction will always be predictable. You will lean in harder to close the gap. Until today. Right now, that predictable loop has collapsed. The baseline is broken. And the moment a human brain realizes a reliable source of psychological safety has disappeared, it panics. If you leave this video right now, you will walk straight into the calculated psychological tests they are about to throw at you. You will interpret their sudden panic as love, you will break your frame, and you will hand them back every ounce of power you just reclaimed. Watch this all the way to the end, because I am about to give you the exact behavioral blueprint of their next 5 moves, and how to remain completely untouchable through every single one of them. The first phase isn't panic, it's confusion. They expect you to break. When 24 hours pass, then 48 hours, then a week, their internal voice shifts from, "they're just busy," to, "why haven't they checked in?" Because they don't want to risk their own ego by reaching out directly, they will deploy microprobes. These are low-risk, high-yield behavioral tests designed to see if you are still monitorable. They will view your social media updates within seconds of posting. They will upload strategic content designed to trigger your specific nostalgia or jealousy. They might send a completely dry, neutral message like, "Did you ever find those keys?" Or drop a single emoji on an old post. Behavioral law. Do not mistake a microprobe for genuine effort. A microprobe is not an apology. It is a cheap ping to test if your phone is still connected to their cell tower. When you ignore or remain completely neutral to their microprobes, their ego suffers a sudden drop in status. Their subconscious reaction to this drop is subtle anger. During this phase, their behavior will seem contradictory. They may pull back entirely, post overly performative content showing how happy or busy they are, or display cold, passive-aggressive behavior if you run into them in person. They are attempting to force you into a reactive state. They want you to ask, "Are you mad at me?" The moment you ask that question, you lose. You have just confirmed that their emotional state still dictates your attention. This is where 95% of people fall off the wagon. When coldness fails, the human brain switches to soft tactics. They will drop a message that sounds surprisingly vulnerable, but notice the pattern. It will still lack real accountability. You'll hear things like, "I've been going through a lot lately," or "I just felt a weird distance between us and wanted to check in." Notice what is missing? An apology, an admission of poor behavior, a concrete plan to change. It is purely emotional bait, designed to open your defensive walls just enough for them to step back into the driver's seat. If your frame remains absolute, if you respond with flat, polite, business-like neutrality or no response at all, the dynamic completely inverts. The person who once held all the emotional leverage is now the one sitting in uncertainty. The hypervigilance has shifted entirely to them. They begin analyzing every word you say, every delay in your response, and every shift in your body language. You are no longer an option they are managing. You are a variable they can no longer predict or control. When you stop chasing, you don't just stop messaging someone. You perform an act of radical self-governance. You pull your focus out of their orbit and place it firmly back onto your own axis. They will try the microprobes. They will try the passive-aggressive coldness. They will try the low-effort bids for sympathy. Your operational strategy moving forward is simple. Zero emotional reaction. Maximum internal stability. If you choose to engage, do it from a position of absolute neutrality. Do not reward minimal effort with maximal access. Let them sit in the quiet room they built for themselves until they realize that if they want a place in your life, the price is genuine respect, clear effort, and real accountability. Keep your frame solid. Keep your attention focused on your own path. Hold the line. To understand what happens when you suddenly cease all chasing behaviors, you must first understand how human neural architecture processes expectation and predictability. The human brain is not a passive receiver of reality. It is a predictive machine, constantly building internal scripts about how people in its environment will react based on historical data. When you spend weeks, months, or years consistently reaching out, checking in, and making excuses for someone's distance, you create a deeply entrenched behavioral baseline in their mind. You effectively program their subconscious to categorize you as a permanent, zero-risk asset. In their mental model, your presence is an absolute guarantee, a background utility that requires zero upkeep, zero emotional investment, and zero effort to maintain. They operate with a supreme psychological comfort of knowing that no matter how cold they act, no matter how much distance they create, or how low on their priority list you sit, you will inevitably act as the bridge over that gap. You will step forward to fix the silence. You will send the double text. You will over-explain your feelings to bridge their apathy. This creates an asymmetric dynamic where they possess total relational leverage without having to spend a single drop of emotional capital. The exact millisecond you stop chasing, that entire predictive structure suffers a catastrophic failure. Initially, their brain attempts to dismiss the change as a temporary anomaly, assuming you are simply occupied, driving, or sleeping. But as the silent hours stretch into days, the missing input triggers a profound state of cognitive dissonance. The human mind inherently despises a void where an expected pattern used to exist. When an established baseline suddenly drops to zero, the brain stops feeling secure and immediately shifts into a mode of hypervigilance and threat assessment. They go from taking your presence for granted to actively monitoring your absence. The silence feels deafening to them precisely because it breaks the rule they relied on to feel superior and safe in the dynamic. They begin to replay past interactions, searching for the exact moment the shift occurred, wondering if you met someone else, if you finally saw through their behavior, or if you simply woke up one day and decided they were no longer worth the investment. This internal shift flips the entire power balance. The anxiety that once lived inside your chest, the constant waiting for a text, the overanalyzing of tone, the fear of losing them, is instantly transferred straight into their nervous system. You haven't fired a shot, launched an insult, or thrown a dramatic reaction. You have simply withdrawn the energetic supply that was feeding their ego, forcing their brain to confront the uncomfortable, disorienting reality that they are no longer in control of the narrative. Once the initial disruption of your baseline takes root, and their brain registers the unsettling void where your constant pursuit used to be, they enter the phase of calculated testing through microprobes. In behavioral profiling, a microprobe is a low-risk, highly calculated impulse designed to gather maximum intelligence on your emotional state while exposing zero of their own vulnerability. They are hyper-aware that reaching out with a direct, honest, or vulnerable message requires them to surrender leverage and acknowledge the shift in the power dynamic. To avoid this cost to their ego, they turn to covert, low-effort tactics aimed at testing the structural integrity of your silence. They want to answer one specific question. Is this non-responsiveness a permanent shift in your self-worth? Or is it just a temporary emotional game you are playing to get a reaction out of them? To run this test, they deploy behaviors that carry complete plausible deniability. You will notice them viewing your social media updates within seconds or minutes of posting, ensuring their name consistently appears at the top of your viewer list as a subtle, silent reminder of their presence. They might post hyper-specific content, an inside joke, a clip of a song you introduced them to, a memory from a place you visited together, or a performative display of sudden self-improvement, specifically designed to trigger your emotional memory and entice you to break frame. If passive digital presence fails to provoke a response, the microprobe escalates to low-investment direct contact. This comes in the form of completely dry, operational, or absurdly neutral communications. A single emoji dropped on a story, a late-night text asking an irrelevant logistical question, like whether you remember the name of a restaurant, or an accidental double tap on an old photo. These are low-cost behavioral pings. If you bite, if you reply instantly, if you respond with high emotional energy, or if you call them out with anger, you give them the exact psychological payoff they were hunting for. Your reaction signals to their nervous system that you are still hyper-attuned to them, that your silence was merely a passive-aggressive ploy, and that they still maintain absolute control over your attention. The entire power dynamic snaps right back to its original state, and they comfortably retreat, reassured that you are still firmly on the hook. When their low-effort microprobes fail to elicit an emotional response or break your silence, their internal state undergoes a sharp transition from mild curiosity to intense ego agitation. In human behavior, whenever an individual relies on another person for continuous, effortless status and validation, any sudden loss of that supply triggers an instinctive threat response. The ego cannot tolerate a void in leverage. It views your refusal to take the bait not as neutral distance, but as an active loss of dominance. Because they lack the emotional maturity to handle this sudden drop in perceived power, their immediate psychological defense mechanism is to convert that anxiety into annoyance, cold resentment, or performative indifference. This period marks the ego spike, where their actions become hyper-focused on forcing a reaction out of you to reclaim the upper hand. During this phase, you will observe a dramatic, highly calculated shift in their external demeanor. They may adopt a posture of extreme performative detachment, going out of their way to show the world, and specifically you, how completely unbothered and thriving they are without your presence. They will upload sudden influxes of social updates featuring new social circles, late nights out, or exaggerated displays of happiness, all crafted to send a clear, non-verbal message that your absence carries zero weight. If you happen to occupy the same physical space or professional environment, their behavior will swing toward cold, rigid passivity or overt dismissiveness. They might deliberately avoid eye contact, speak to everyone in the room except you, or adopt a sharp, curt tone if direct communication is unavoidable. This exaggerated coldness is not true apathy. True apathy is quiet, natural, and effortless. This intense, visible coldness is an active, high-energy performance designed specifically for an audience of one. They are deliberately attempting to provoke an emotional outburst, a confrontation, or an anxious plea for clarity. They want you to break down and ask why they are acting differently, because the moment you express confusion or hurt over their sudden coldness, you validate their importance. You confirm that their mood still dictates your emotional baseline, effectively resetting the dynamic and granting them the exact reassurance their inflated ego was desperately seeking. As the ego spike and performative indifference fail to provoke a reaction, their strategy shifts into a far more deceptive and dangerous phase: the deployment of fake vulnerability and false re-engagement. In behavioral profiling, this is known as a tactical concession. When an individual realizes that coldness and passive aggression are not breaking your frame, their subconscious survival instinct forces them to change tactics. They recognize that to re-establish a connection and pull you back into their sphere of influence, they must simulate the very things you originally wanted from them: openness, emotional depth, and apparent regret. However, because this gesture is driven by a desire for power reclamation rather than genuine self-reflection, it carries distinct behavioral markers that expose it as a hollow maneuver designed purely to test your resolve. This phase typically begins with an unexpected message or conversation that sounds strikingly sincere on the surface. They might drop a sudden admission of hardship, saying things like, "I've been going through such a difficult time lately," or "I was just thinking about us and how strange things feel between us." They may even offer pseudo-apologies that sound meaningful until you analyze their linguistic structure. Statements such as, "I'm sorry if I made you feel distance," or "I hate that things ended up like this," are carefully constructed to give the illusion of an apology while taking zero actual ownership for specific past actions. Notice the subtle linguistic shift. They apologize for your feelings or the general situation, not for their own calculated choices. They are throwing emotional breadcrumbs, waiting to see if you will pounce on them with forgiveness, warmth, and immediate access. The primary objective of fake vulnerability is to trigger your empathy and lower your psychological guard. They know that your natural instinct, built over months or years of chasing, is to comfort them, reassure them, and bridge the emotional gap the moment they show a sliver of softness. If you take this bait, if you respond with long, emotionally laden texts, express relief that they reached out, or immediately agree to meet up without them demonstrating real, consistent behavioral change, you instantly surrender all the leverage you accrued during your period of silence. The moment you offer complete emotional access based on a low-investment, high-impact message, their brain receives the signal it was hunting for. You are still entirely accessible, highly predictable, and easily manipulated by the slightest display of emotion. Once that reassurance is logged in their nervous system, the performative warmth vanishes almost immediately. They will pull back, become distant once again, and leave you wondering how a conversation that felt so promising suddenly turned cold, completely unaware that you just fell for a low-cost, high-reward psychological trap designed to strip you of your frame. The final and paramount phase of this dynamic centers on absolute frame retention, which serves as the ultimate test of your internal sovereignty and emotional discipline. In the realm of behavioral mechanics, a frame is the underlying psychological reality, boundary, and set of rules that dictates an interaction. Whoever possesses the stronger, more stable frame inevitably controls the direction and outcome of the dynamic. When you refuse to break under the pressure of their microprobes, their ego spikes, or their deceptive bids for fake vulnerability, you are enforcing a frame of absolute non-reactivity and high self-worth. This does not mean adopting an angry, dramatic, or overtly hostile stance, as anger and drama are merely loud indicators that the other person still holds total remote control over your emotional state. True structural dominance is characterized by absolute, unbothered neutrality. It is the ability to perceive their calculated attempts at provocation or hoovering without allowing your heart rate to spike, your mind to race, or your actions to become reactive. When you master absolute frame retention, your response to any of their incoming communications becomes operational, calm, and completely devoid of emotional leverage. If they send a low-effort operational text, you either remain completely silent or respond with flat, polite, ultra-brief language that offers zero extra information, zero curiosity about their life, and zero emotional hooks for them to grab onto. You treat them with the exact same casual, distant courtesy you would extend to a total stranger or a distant acquaintance. This precise behavioral posture communicates a terrifying truth to their subconscious mind. The high-priority, deeply invested version of you that used to orbit their every move no longer exists. By treating their attempts at communication with zero emotional intensity, you shatter their internal narrative that you are sitting at home pining for their return or playing a desperate game of playing hard to get. You show them through undeniable behavioral consistency that the door to your energy, your time, and your intimacy is permanently locked, and that low-investment maneuvers will never again grant them access. Holding this frame requires an uncompromising commitment to your own long-term peace over short-term emotional relief. The temptation to break your frame, to send that long text demanding answers, to accept a late-night invite out of nostalgia, or to call them out on their obvious games will be intense, because the human brain inherently craves closure and validation. But true power comes from realizing that closure is not something another person gives you. Closure is a boundary you decide to enforce for yourself. By remaining entirely unshakable and consistently out of reach, you permanently alter the balance of power. You transition from being an option they casually managed to an unreadable, unmanageable entity they can no longer influence. You keep your energy entirely intact, protect your self-respect, and force them to live with the permanent, irreversible consequences of taking your presence for granted.